Welcome to EdVantage. I'm your host, David Young, and I hope you've had a great week. I have had an excellent week because I've been with principals or I've been in schools nearly every day, and I'm tired. It's Friday, but man, it's just been so fun. It's so energizing for me uh, to get into schools, to be around teachers and administrators, and of course to be around the kids. I love being able to see what they do and how they view the world, and have interactions with them. They make me smile, and they're also a good reminder of why we do what we do. So I hope you've been able to get in classrooms this week and to see the same thing. In today's episode, I want to talk about a tough situation that we find ourselves in as administrators in general, but certainly as building level principals. And here's the situation I want to talk about. What do you do if a teacher's not meeting your expectations? I'm talking about a teacher that just simply isn't doing a great job. When I do walkthrough observations, student learning is not at a high level, etc. Nobody's perfect, right? And so we all have our areas of growth, and certainly as principals and district administrators. But again, I want to focus this really on principals today. We all have teachers that need a lot of support. So that's what I want to talk to you about today. That's not a simple thing. So, what do you do when you find yourself in that situation? Well, to start with, I want to put this situation or this conversation today in the context of what we've been learning lately on EdVantage. We started a few weeks ago with talking about what the principal's job is in one sentence. And of course, that one sentence is it's the principal's job to accurately identify the superstar teachers in the building, excuse me, and then to make as many other teachers in the building as possible operate in the same way that those superstar teachers operate. If you can do that, your students are going to learn at higher levels, and that's going to make your school more successful, and it's going to help us achieve our mission, which is to help all students achieve 100% of their whatever their potential is. So, how do you pull that off? Well, to pull that off, you have to first spend time figuring out what it is that your superstar teachers do that make them superstars, what it is that they do that make them the very best and most talented staff members you have. Then you have to work on creating a set of agreements that outline those what those best practices are and establish those agreements across the school to be implemented in all classrooms. And once those are in place, then as a leader, your job is to set out and make sure that those agreements happen in all classrooms. It sounds simple. It really is a simple mission, but there are lots of complex parts along the way, and those are some of the things that we try to tackle here on EdVantage. So within that context, now let's set the stage for what the situation is with a teacher who isn't meeting expectations. You have those agreements in place. You know what they are. The teachers know what they are as well. And you simply have a teacher that when I say she isn't, and I'm going to say she, could be he or she, but it when I say she isn't meeting expectations in this context, she isn't implementing the agreements. She either isn't implementing them at all, or she isn't implementing them at a very high level, or a mix of those two things in her classroom. As the leader, hopefully you've been in the classroom a lot, so you are seeing that, you know it. It's not just something that you suspect or that you've heard about. You've actually been in the classroom and you've seen that those agreements aren't being implemented. Now, maybe you may also have reports from students or parents about things that aren't going well in that class. But then on top of that, you see that student achievement, isn't improving in that classroom. So you really kind of have some triangulated data. Now, I will say I think it's enough for you to only have two of those things. You've been in the classroom a lot and you've seen that the agreements aren't being implemented and you see that students aren't learning at high levels. If it's only those two things, those are plenty. So when you find yourself into that situation, what do you do? Well, priority one and really step one and really the key mindset is in this situation, the first thing you do is you need to develop a courage. You need to develop a courageous mindset. You need to spend time, and we've talked about this before on EdVantage. As a leader, there are times that you have to show courage. And the rule of thumb typically is the more often that you show courage at the very moment that you need to show courage, the less often you have to show it. So, so really that just means when you get in situations where it requires courage and requires you to be uncomfortable, the more you can embrace those opportunities and not put those things off, but really uh, be convicted in your heart by what's best for kids and what has to be done, even if it's something you don't want to do. The more often you do that and do it at the very moment you should, typically the less often you're required to do that. So, priority one is develop a courageous mindset, and this will help you. Spend some time, you've been in this classroom, you know what things look like. Spend some time reflecting on these facts. Number one, your school, it's not like in your school that we're all just kind of doing the best we know how to do. Your school has agreements. So we have defined what is the best when we're in establishing best practices agreements. We know, we have said clearly, here are the things that are the best practices, and we've embraced doing those in the classroom. So, and then number two, students, kids are in that class, and they deserve to be benefiting from those agreements, from those best practices every day. So, as the leader, fixing this situation, improving this situation has to be priority number one. Don't avoid it, don't put it off. It needs to improve quickly, and that's going to require you to show courage. And then I'm going to give you some tips today on what steps you should take, what the formula is for you being able to kind of channel that courage into an effective structure that hopefully it will remedy that situation. Hopefully, it will help that teacher grow. So, priority one is develop a courageous mindset. Priority two, as quickly as possible, you need to determine if the situation you're in is a skill problem or a will problem. And here's what I mean by that. I'll say that again. Is it a problem of skill or is it a problem of will? Think about these things. Number one, if it's a skill problem, that just means that the teacher lacks the skill needed to implement the agreements. So what do we do about that? Well, we need to provide training, we need to provide support, we need to spend more time with that teacher, and potentially have an instructional coach or a mentor or somebody else spend time with that teacher providing feedback and coaching. If it's a skill problem, you need to know that. On the flip side, if it's a will problem, that means that the teacher, for whatever reason, is not willing to implement the agreement. So that could be due to effort, not being willing to put in the effort to do it. It could be resistance to change. It could be that the teacher just philosophically doesn't agree with those agreements. But all of those, there's a way that you handle each of those. But priority two is you need to figure out which one of those is it. Is it skill or is it will? So here's my advice. So where do you start? My advice is even if you believe that it might be a will problem, you need to address it as a skill problem. That needs to be your first attempt at it, no matter what. Even if you suspect that the teacher just really doesn't want to implement these agreements or it's too much work, whatever it is, don't go into it with that mindset. That's kind of a negative mindset. Give the teacher the benefit of the doubt and assume that it's a skill problem. So address it as a skill deficit. um, and assume that the teacher needs training and support, and then provide it. Now, what does that look like? That I mentioned a minute ago. That could be mentoring. That could be time with spent with the teacher in the classroom, outside the classroom. I'm going to give you I'm going to give you 8 proactive steps in a second for what that means to recognize that that teacher needs training and support, and then provide it. Now, if it doesn't get better, you should provide additional training and support. And then if it still doesn't improve, guess what? You should provide more training and support. What will happen is if you address it that way, and you can do all those, by the way, do it with a smile on your face, and I mean a genuine smile, not a disingenuous smile. Approach it with a positive attitude. I'm going to train and support this teacher because I believe it's a skill problem. If the teacher does improve, more training, more support, more encouragement. If it still doesn't work, more training, more support, more encouragement. And I want to tell you, by providing it, by providing the support in that way, the large majority of the time, and I mean the large majority of the time, it gets better. The teacher will improve. Students will start to learn more. The tide will turn, and things will start to look much better. Now, that teacher's not going to, you're not going to snap your fingers and that teacher become a superstar teacher, but they will improve in those qualities, particularly if you're providing the extent of training and support that I'm describing. If it doesn't, there will be a moment, and I don't know how many rounds of training you'll go through, but there'll be a moment, you'll know when it happens, when both you and the teacher know that it is not a skill deficit. It's not a skill problem. It's a will problem. You'll know it, the teacher will know it, and you'll both know that each other knows it. It won't be a mystery. It won't be a question. It'll be just that moment where we're like, okay, this is where we are. And at that point, the process then switches to evaluation more than coaching, which means now once it switches to evaluation, now it could still result in improvement, and we hope that it does, but it also could result in a poor evaluation, dismissal from the position, or movement to another position. It gets into that evaluative process more than a coaching process. So let me circle back now to how do you take this proactive? I think you need to take the proactive, you need to give the teacher the benefit of the doubt, take the proactive training and support process. So, what does that look like? Well, I want to encourage you to implement these steps in this order with increasing firmness. Now, I want to say that again. These steps in this order with increasing firmness. Now, that doesn't mean when I say firmness, I'm not saying you're being mean or punitive, but you're getting tighter on your direction, on the accountability that you're providing to see that these things get done. So these are 8 things that I would recommend that you do in this order. Number one, so go back. This is a teacher who's struggling, not implementing the agreements. We believe it's a skill problem. Number one, you need to increase the number of walkthrough observations that you're doing in that teacher's classroom, because you need to get a clearer picture of exactly what's happening. You need to build a sense of urgency. It's okay for that teacher to feel that urgency. Like I think the principal's in my room more than he used to be. There must be a reason for that. Um, and I also think by getting into the classroom more, you're not only going to see negative things, you're also going to see some things that you can praise. And I think as you go into this support process, this training process, it doesn't need to be all negative. You need to be able to praise things that that teacher's doing well. So, number one, increase the number of walkthrough observations that you're doing. Number two, once you get a clear picture, you need to meet with the teacher to discuss your concerns and to get feedback from the teacher about those concerns. That's important because understanding the teacher's thought process is really important. So there may be some things that aren't going well, but as you meet with the teacher and talk about that, you may find out that there's a flaw in the teacher's planning process, or the teacher's, you may see exactly gap is in understanding, which could help you remedy the situation very quickly. So, number one, increase the number of walkthroughs. Number two, then sit down with the teacher to talk about what your concerns are. Number three, you need to set some specific walkthrough criteria for the teacher's classroom. And for a while, only look for those things when you're in the classroom. So I've talked to you in the past few weeks about don't go in and look for 30, 40, 50 things. Just have a set number of, 8 to 10 or 12 or not, maybe 15, but a much smaller number of things that align with your agreements. I'm going to go another step down now. If you have a teacher who's really struggling and they're struggling with all 15 of those things, try to narrow that down to just maybe 4 or 5. The 4 or 5 ones that maybe would help the teacher improve the most quickly, or the 4 or 5 that are the ones that are just the most glaring. You can decide what the 4 or 5 are based on, uh, kind of your own judgment, but don't continue to go in looking for 15 things. Narrow it down. Let the teacher know for the next little bit when I come in, I'm only looking for these 4 or 5 things, and I'm going to give you feedback on those. Number four, you need to begin now. Now, this is assuming we've done steps one, two, and three, and things are not getting better. So you don't have to do all 8 of these things. You just need to continue to do the next thing if the thing before that is not helping or is not, fixing the problem. So if we've gone through those 3 things and the teacher still needs support, number four, begin meeting with the teacher weekly to plan together so that you can set expectations and encourage rather than being critical. If you'll have a scheduled set aside time, so maybe you say to the teacher, let's start getting together every Friday. Every Friday, you bring your lesson plans. Let's talk about what you're doing next week. And you'll be able to coach the teacher on how to make sure that she has gotten the agreements implemented through her lesson plans for the next week, which is very proactive and allows you then the next week, you're going to for sure have things to brag on. You'll be able to go in and see her implementing those things. So weekly planning is really important. Now, if you've done those and it's still not getting a lot better, number five is instead of meeting with the teacher weekly, start meeting with the teacher daily. And I know, this is going to take it's going to take some of your time, but this is part of having courage and being able to carve out the time that is needed in order to, again, we need to make sure this is a skill problem and we're addressing it like one until we see otherwise. So start meeting with the teacher daily to review the next day's lesson plans. And this will allow the teacher to make changes each night instead of making changes a week at a time. And of course, you're continuing to do the same things. You've still got the walkthroughs narrowed down, the walkthrough instrument just narrowed down to a set number of 4 or 5 things. You're continuing to do the other things that we already have in place. Number six, if the teacher's still struggling, co teach a lesson with the teacher. So plan one together and go in and you all co teach it. This will allow you to model for the teacher what the agreements look like. And it will also allow you to kind of quietly coach the teacher as the lesson progresses. You all will be teaching together. You'll be able to stop by and say, okay, here's what I just did. The next part's yours. Make sure you do this, this, and this. And then you'll be able to give some praise as well when they do, when she does a good job. Number seven, if you're still working toward improvement, number seven, have the struggling teacher visit other teachers inside or outside your school. So now I don't recommend that you just say, hey, pick some teachers to go visit. Make sure that you direct, I would like for you to go see Miss Smith, who teaches English at the high school. Or I would like for you, I've set up a visit for you to go to a neighboring county, and I've got a particular teacher that I want you to see. So you got to do a little networking. You got to find another teacher that, number one, is really good at implementing your agreements, but also is somebody that this teacher could model after. Maybe somebody who has kind of similar gifts or a similar style. And then when you set that observation up, I encourage you as the principal to go with the teacher and do that observation together. Here's why that's important. If you can go in and do the observation together, you all have now had a common experience. So now when you go back to, we're planning together each day, you'll be able to say, well, remember when we were in Miss Smith's class and we saw her do this, this, and this? Let's see if we can make that happen in your lesson. Or do you remember the question that Miss Smith asked? Here's why that was a good question. It just builds a foundation for some common, it's a common experience that you all can build off of together. So we're through seven things. The eighth thing is you need to make sure as you're going through this process that you're keeping some documentation. And here's especially if you get to step eight. If you get to step eight, you need to have been keeping some documentation maybe through steps, you know, three and on. It's okay for this whole process to be really informal during the first couple steps, but once you get to, like I say, step three, step four, if if the improvement is not happening easily and it's probably not happening quickly, it's going to be likely that you may need pretty soon a written improvement plan that has to be signed by you. We're getting more into evaluation now. So now there needs to be a written improvement plan that I sign and the teacher signs. And it's just good if you've been keeping some documentation along the way. And then if the improvement plan isn't successful, the next step would be to implement kind of an official individual corrective action plan. But I want to say, once you get to that point, now you're kind of heavy into evaluation. You've moved out of coaching into evaluation, and I'm just going to say, for EdVantage purposes, that usually differs by state and it differs by district. So you'll need, once you get to that point, you need to consult your district certified evaluation plan. Um, but they generally come down to doing more formal written documentation to prove that the teacher, number one, clearly understands the expectations. Number two, that the teacher has all the resources and support that he or she need to succeed. That's part of the evaluation process as well. To make sure that the teacher puts in the time and effort to make the needed improvements and changes, and then that the teacher is officially and fairly evaluated, based on his or her performance. Now, I'll come back quickly to coaching. I don't want you to think coaching isn't part of evaluation. It is. Um, but if you follow the steps that I've just outlined from having a struggling teacher through 8 steps that are very, very coaching oriented. If you follow those and you're keeping some documentation along the way, um, you will have already seen whether coaching is going to work. And so that's why I divide the two between, coaching is part of the evaluation process. I would approach this with a coaching mindset. It will show itself if it needs to become evaluation. So evaluation is the next step in the process once coaching fails. So I'll end the podcast episode today by saying this. The large majority of teachers, the overwhelming majority of teachers are coming to work every day doing the best that they know how. They're taking their job seriously, they're preparing beforehand, they care about children, their students in their classroom, and they're working hard. And I think as a leader, it's important that we acknowledge that and that we realize that. Um, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that high levels of learning are going on in every classroom. And if you develop agreements, it's likely that it's going to require some change in some or many or maybe all of your classrooms. It may require some adjustment. And, change is hard, but for academic improvement, like I said, it's likely that change may need to happen in your classrooms. Once your best practice agreements are in place, rooted in what your superstars do, remember we're back to that mission to know who the superstars are, develop those agreements, and get those superstar practices happening everywhere. This process is crucial when you have a teacher who isn't living up to those expectations. Helping your teachers change is crucial. And hopefully, today's lesson gave you some tips to make that happen. So I want to thank you for joining me today. I want to encourage you. We're coming out of January. It seems like January's lasted like 3 months, but it's only 1 month, and we're at the end. We're getting ready to go into February. I want to encourage you to just keep going, get in classrooms as much as you can this week. I love hearing about the work that you're doing. So I want to encourage you, as always, reach out to me. I want to also encourage you to share episodes of the podcast on your social media, share with your colleagues and your friends, and of course, as always, rate, like, share, subscribe to YouTube, and thank you for listening today. So until next time, have a great Friday, have a great weekend, and we'll see you next time on EdVantage. Take care.